all recorded. I was a little bit apprehensive about today's leadership roundtable because of the word. And do you know why? I realised that you're on two sides of the fence here, aren't you? We all kind of go up in arms when jargon gets sort of dealt to us. But when somebody calls us out for it, we get so defensive. And it's kind of like, oh my goodness, it's quite an emotional thing for a lot of people, and it stirs up a lot of emotion. So what I wanted to do is just, I guess, informally just take us through a few things, and perhaps maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation around jargon in our lived experience, pros and cons of it today. So let's crack on. I'm going to kick off today with a number 1386 and ask anybody whether this number has any meaning to them in any way, shape or form. No random guesses? I'll tell you what it is. In 1386 is the first recorded evidence of the use of the word jargon. In 1386, can you believe it? And it was used by Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales. And it was used by Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales at that point to talk about the birds tweeting in the trees. And since 1386, the definition of the word jargon has gone through 3 or 4 different iterations to where it is today for the majority of people. So I guess the first thing that I would say today is we probably ought to call out the word jargon as jargon. So today's weekly moment is all about jargon. And there's a couple of things that I just want to just really frame for today's conversation, which is this. A lot of people talk about jargon being the slang of business and work, because jargon is understood academically as formal speak. So it's the formal, specialized language of groups or experts in a formal situation, whereas slang, of course, is more colloquial, isn't it? It's more informal. So people can sometimes call jargon the slang of business and work. And other people say that jargon is a buzzword to avoid. Really interesting in my research talking about that. And the reason why I've put this slide up right at the very beginning is just to provoke a little bit of thought around the fact that jargon is different to slang, is different to buzzword. A buzzword is something that we use which is on trend, that is of our times, it's modern, it's now, and probably transient. There's buzzwords that we are using now that we won't be using in 3 or 4 years time, or even maybe weeks. And slang, as I mentioned, is that an informal kind of colloquial element of jargon being formal. So when we're thinking about jargon, we're thinking about the formal use of language in business and work. That's as far as I want to go. Now, you can go and get the definitions of it, but the key thing is this: there are pros and cons to using jargon, especially when we're thinking about transformation and we're thinking about humanizing transformation. Now, if anybody's got a big kind of, a big kind of siren horn, they'd be going, Mel, 2 jargon words, humanize and transformation. That's 2 jargon words in one. You're absolutely right. But if I was to say to you, what does humanizing mean to you? Bringing the human into it. What does transformation mean to you? Creating difference, going from one state to another state, as opposed to improvement, which we talked about last week. So if there is validity for the buzzword, for the jargon, should we use it? So what I want to do is I just want to take you through 2 instances of where jargon is used in a way that is positive, and 2 instances of where jargon is used when it is not positive. And the 2 positives is where I'll begin. The first positive use of the word jargon is because we as human beings are tribal. We are social animals. So we tend to use jargon to group together, to come together, to define ourselves as a group. And that can be a team, that can be a group of human beings that have got a particular knowledge. And that is very much the case, isn't it? When you're thinking about expertise, Dilyn, in your world, in the world of project management and PMOs, you know, there's a lot of lingo in there that absolutely has meaning for the people within that group. And it gels them together, it brings them together positively. But then when that jargon goes outside, when that language becomes something that is used outside of that group and outside of that knowledge, that's when the use of the word jargon becomes negative. So we've got to think about jargon as something that can connect us as experts, as teams, as cultures, as organizations. The other one, which is really important to my work, and Tom, your work as well, is difference. Sometimes when we are trying to create difference, when we're trying to create space between what is normal for you and what is new, trying to introduce something new, we need difference. And there's a word that I find that is overused a lot, which is the word collaboration. And when I use the word collaboration in a lot of business meetings and in a lot of team meetings and training, I can see people going, I collaborate. Don't know what she's talking about. There's nothing, we all collaborate. And every time I use that word, it's very hard for me to create a sense of difference with what I mean by collaboration. Because what I mean by collaboration is when we are ideating, when we have got diversity of human thought and contribution, when we have got access to technology and humans, the collaboration becomes something really, really rich and new and around ideation, diversity, equality, inclusion, and all of those things. But that's not what collaboration means for a lot of the people that I talk to in my daily work life. Collaboration is just the way we talk to each other. It's our team. We work together as teams. I was with an organization last week and the word collaboration came up in the conversation. And what was interesting was everybody agreed that everybody was bang on for collaboration. When I asked them to define what that meant, what they were saying was, we've got an openness within our teams. Okay, then how do you work across teams? Oh, we don't really do as much as that. We could do that a lot better. Well, isn't that collaboration? What about outside of your organization? So there's something about the use of words that when we want to bring newness into play, when we want to introduce difference, i.e. a space, like a cold shower, to get people to take notice of difference, of something new to consider, then actually, you know, introducing new words and language might actually be something that is a positive thing. We have a phrase which is called the networked ecosystem. I am the first person to put my hands up and say, without question, that's buzzword. Without question, that's jargon. But when I have the conversation around what a networked ecosystem is and the value that it can bring to an organization, it's a heck of a lot more effective and has so much more impact than if I'm trying to get people to stretch their understanding of collaboration. So there are real opportunities for us to consider the use of, jargon to create newness, difference, and space between what's normal and habitual and within our rituals of today, our habits of today, and getting people to understand the opportunity of possibility and tomorrow. So then we get into the world of some of the cons of jargon. And the biggest con of jargon is where people are hiding behind it, isn't it? I don't know about you, but have you been in a situation where you've just, you've sat there and you've gone, this person hasn't got a blinking clue what they're talking about, and they are throwing it all at the wall. Yeah, they're hiding behind words and phrases, and that can be incredibly toxic. And one of the most, I guess, powerful impact that can have on a team is lack of trust in that person, and lacking trust of the message of the thing that person is trying to bring to the fore. So hiding behind words and hiding behind phrases and language can be a really, really toxic thing. It can be a really harmful thing in terms of intention. And then the other thing that jargon can be used for is power. And I have been here. I have been on the other side of this quite a lot, especially when I was an executive leader as part of a senior leadership team, and I was the only woman on that team. It was incredible how language was used within that team to push the power of the group, as opposed to me having lack of power in that senior leadership team. So, you know, it's something for us to think about in ourselves, because sometimes we're trying so hard to get people to understand things that sometimes what we might be doing is pushing too far. But equally, power, using words and language for ego to take a powerful position over another human being is really not a good use of jargon. And a lot of people in the world of management consulting and consulting more generally can sometimes use this without even knowing it. You know, it feels good if I can put myself in a position of power, because that means that I can control the situation. So inadvertently you start using words to push the power forward, and it's really just ego. So 2 positive examples of jargon, 2 negative examples of jargon. Interesting, huh? There's also something else in the world of business. The most famous form of jargon is abbreviation. Oh boy, the people that use jargon, and organizations and professionals and academics and cultures in a particular organization, or the team that are in the tech department, or the customer service team over there, boy, do we love a little bit of abbreviation in terms of jargon. And I've put some elements down here, some abbreviations down here, and I just want everybody to see whether they know and whether they are familiar with all of these abbreviations here. Pretty much. Any you don't? About 3, Tom?
Yeah, 3 from my side as well. And I hope that you're going to run over them all, because my curiosity is getting the best of me.
I'm not sure. Not suitable for N. I'm not sure what the N is.
Interesting.
It's usually a W, and it's associated with, you know, pictures you shouldn't show on your work computer.
Okay, that's an abbreviation that I haven't heard of. Yeah. So really interesting, really, really interesting. Right, I'll run through them. ATM at the moment. But actually, if you're in the finance sector, you might think that that's an automated teller machine, an ATM machine on the high street. EOM, end of message. Yeah. FYI.
For your information.
Yeah.
So that comes at the end of month again if you're in accounts.
There we go. There we go.
Not in accounts, but just in case you are.
Okay. BBWF. Anybody know that one?
No.
I'm glad you don't know that one, because that is my personal tribe with a group of women. Best buddy with furry. It's tribal. Brings us together. We have the hashtag BBWF. Okay, there you go. You see?
What's the F stand for? Flurry.
With furry. Yeah, we're all dog owners.
Oh, I see.
Oh, Tom Styles, I don't want your brain to be going down that avenue again with the other abbreviation that you were talking about. Yes. All right. FOMO.
We're missing out.
We're missing out.
Yeah. Absolutely. And NSFN?
No.
Not something for now.
Uh,
Not something for now. I mean, how many abbreviations are there? What's really interesting about the abbreviations is this: it's another element of the tribal jargon that is coming into business and work at the moment. Because we've got younger generations coming in, we've got the digital natives coming into the work environment, there is a shift in language. There is a shift in language that they use because they understand it from a tribal perspective, but it's really hard for us to understand. So much so, there is the word goat. Yeah, Dilyn?
And I think I know this because I listened to Eminem. And
Okay.
is that the greatest of all time?
It's the greatest of all time, yeah. But have you heard the story, whether it's an urban myth or not, where the young apprentice called their boss a goat and got sacked because they thought it was an insult and it was inappropriate use of language? And all they were doing was saying that their manager was absolutely fantastic. Isn't it funny? So it's just that understanding between the two. So there's something here about things are moving. We've got to be aware of it. We've got to understand that the language of business and work is changing as well. So there's something really important for us to just kind of stay mindful of here. So the key thing is this: jargon is everywhere. It is everywhere. It's very hard not to use jargon in some way, shape, or form. We should absolutely be mindful of it and try not to when it is going to be a disadvantage and detrimental. But equally, when are those times when it could be positive and it could add value? As I mentioned, there's pros and cons. What I've got up there is a wee link. So if you want the slides, or if you want to take a screenshot of this slide, it's really interesting because it gives you examples of jargon in the workplace, and you can just have a little bit of a laugh, but it's so good. And share it with your teams, because to open up the conversation around jargon for me is very, very important, because of what I said right at the very beginning of today's session. It is emotional. It is incredibly emotional. Jargon, when we get dealt it, and equally when we get called out because we have just served it, it can be really, really, really emotional for us. So it's so important for us to just become aware of it and maybe just socialize the idea of jargon having positive and not just always negative connotations. So what might we start to do about it? What might we do if we realize that sometimes there might be a use and sometimes there might be ego coming in the way? And the key thing is this: is getting really, really clear about our intention and the impact that it has. What are we trying to achieve? And how are people understanding it in terms of its impact? How is it being received? And how are we showing up alongside it? How is it being perceived? And I think, one of the things for us all is it's very, 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 in this world that's so incredibly time poor, and we're running at 1,000 miles an hour, and we've got so many different things to do. We're focusing all in on our intention, and we lose focus. We spend not enough time on impact. And actually, the impact is where the real true understanding of our users comes from. We really need to think about the impact that their language and the words that we have will have on our users. It's very, 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 very important. Really, really important. So for me, when we add jargon to the transformation challenge, and when I say transformation, I just hark back at last week's weekly moment where we talked about the difference between the improvement mindset and the transformation mindset. This is trying to support people to design and move towards something different, something new, something that is visionary and not fully visible. It's really, really important for us to start to play and see the difference between what I've got here. There is the idea of and this is from Gestalt, this is positive psychology, we want to always be able to meet people where they are at. So what do we mean by that? To meet people where they are at. It's one of the first things we learn when we go into the world of Gestalt in positive psychology. It's basically to understand the person for who they are and where they are, their understanding, their capability, their energy, their emotion, and we meet them at that point. So it's meeting people where they're at. And when we're able to meet people where they're at, we're able to engage with them and we're able to build trust. But in order to meet people where they're at, we've got to understand all of those things, their emotions, their capabilities, their habits, their rituals. We've got to understand all of that stuff in order to meet them where they're at. Now, there's something really interesting here, because if we shift into transformation and supporting people through the change of transformation as opposed to improvement, then not always meeting people where they're at works. Because what we're doing is we're meeting somebody in their spot of familiarity. We're conforming to who they are and what they are and where they are. And we're entering into their zone of familiar, their norms, which means that to stretch them out becomes quite difficult. So in our world of transformation and the Dilyn Way framework, what we do is we try and just get people to the boundary. So rather than full on meeting people where they're at, so you're in that familiar zone with them, what we do is we understand them, but instead of meeting them where they're at, we just take them to the edge. We take them to the edge, and it's called Maya, most advanced yet achievable. And what this does is it still engages people and it still builds trust. It doesn't break trust because we've taken them to the edge. It's just at that point. Most advanced basically means the edge, the difference, the unfamiliar, yet acceptable is still within that zone of familiar to them. So we're no longer meeting them where they're at and diluting everything. What we're doing is we're taking them to that boundary, which means that we are supporting them through change. And this is the Maya principle. And the Maya principle was created in the 1950s, and it's being used and still is used today all the time by advertising agencies. The most famous case study of using Maya to effect was Apple and Steve Jobs when they wanted to launch the iPhone. And you've probably heard me tell this story so many different times before, but I mean, it's such a great story as an example and case study of the use of Maya. Apple designed the iPhone and they had the vision of the iPhone. But what they did was they went out to the consumers and they went to number one here. What were consumers familiar with? What were the consumer habits? What was normal life to the consumer? What were some of the beliefs that the consumers had around something that is called a mobile device? And they did all of that research to understand where people were at, that zone of familiarity, what's familiar to them. And what they recognized was that the whole world had a Sony Walkman. The whole world had a Sony Walkman. So when you talked about a mobile device to an individual on the street, it wasn't about a phone, it was about music. It wasn't about lovely touch, squiggly buttons. It was press buttons on your Sony Walkman and get your headphones on and go out on your roller skates. That's what the zone of familiarity was. They knew what possibility was. They knew what the transformational stage and the new identity and the new habits and the new normal that they wanted to create and design, because they had the iPhone. But they couldn't launch the iPhone to the market because they would break Maya. They would break it. They would be beyond the boundary. It would be no longer acceptable. So what did they do? What did they do? They launched the iPod. It was all by design. They launched the iPod because it was about music. And if you have a look at the very first iPod, you will see that it was press button. And then what they did is over time, they changed the features. They kept understanding people's habits, but they kept on the boundary and they kept pushing the boundary, but they never broke the consumer. They kept the consumer with them. They kept pushing and pushing and pushing until in 2007, the iPhone launches. It's a brilliant case study. So, you know, there's something there about just with language and just with transformation is as long as we can be conscious of the principle of Maya, then what we can do is we can still engage people and we can still build trust to bring difference into play. And I won't go into this slide, but this slide is how we use that that concept of Maya with projects and programs. So the key thing here is really, if we genuinely, in the world of transformation, if we are thinking about how can we bring people on the journey towards a new identity, towards something different completely, not improvement, but transformation, then what we want to be doing is we want to be finding the jargon that you've got up here on the screen, the Goldilocks zone, the sweet spot, the Maya. That's what we want to be finding so that we don't break people. It's just enough to keep them familiar, but it's on the boundary and it's pushing them out. It's so incredibly important for us to recognize that. So some do's and don'ts of jargon. You can go to Google and you can find so much on the use of jargon and the, you know, when to use jargon and when not to use jargon. And with these slides, I've got some links in the notes section as well if you want to take some things away. But really important for me is these do's and don'ts for our work. Get to know your audience. We need to understand the individual, the group. We genuinely need to understand them, not to assess their skills only, but to understand them energetically, to understand them emotionally, to understand them as human beings, to understand their habits. And to do that, we need to really observe them. So we don't assess people through a survey and think that we know our audience. So how well do we know our audiences? Thinking about observation as well as assessment, talking to them, you know, getting in there and shadowing them, spending time with them, having their lived experience, going through their lived experience, and also testing for simplification. And I do this a lot. When I'm writing, what I will tend to do is, we've got somebody that we use externally that she charges for her work, but we've also got the team internally as well. Just test for simplification. Hey, I'm about to send this out. Can you read it for me just to see whether it makes sense to you, that it's, you know, you can understand it, and send it to somebody that is outside your jargon group, outside your tribe, just to test it. There is also the use of active voice, that anyone who talks about removing jargon or wanting to use jargon that is powerful says to use the active voice rather than the passive voice. And also being positive. If you're going to be positive about it, you're already on a winning streak. So it's really, really important for us to be positive about how we position new language or words of difference. And challenge the use of the words that we're using. So do I need to use that word? Is there another word that I can use that would make it easier? So intention and impact, really, really important. And there's a few things on, you know, the kind of like rule of don't here, which is don't speak before you think. And I just think this is a classic one, and I had to put it there for all of us. You know, how many times do we say something and then it's kind of like, oh, the words are out, and I need to backtrack. So really, really important for us to think about what we are saying, to give ourselves the space, a stop moment before we respond, to think about the words, to be mindful of the words that we use when we're in a conversation one-to-one, we're in a conversation one-to-many, really important. And the other thing that I think is really important for us is, if we are using jargon in the world of transformation, is not to dilute the meaning. Because sometimes what we can do is we can conform to the people that we're at, and we dilute the meaning such that we're making life harder for ourselves. Sometimes there is a real need for the use of new language or different language, in order for us to get people to be provoked and to think about difference, and so on and so on. So there's some do's and don'ts around the use of jargon for us to think about that. There are so many more, and I've got the links, as I say, in the notes, but it's really, really interesting just to maybe just think for ourselves about when we're using jargon, when we're not using jargon, etc., etc. John, by the way, thank you for putting that link into the chat as well for everybody. That's awesome. Thank you. So just quickly, as always, just to take a break in today's theme and just let everybody know that today's topic is part of a wider thing, which is obviously humanising transformation. That's what we live and breathe. It is part of the framework called the Dilyn Way. That framework has an approach and practice. We have certification training. There is foundation and practitioner programs that are going to be available from next month. And it's really important for us to get as many people that work in the world of transformation and change and modern leadership to understand that there are tools, that there are techniques, that there are practices out there to help us to bring humanity and the human back into the world of transformation. And then more important than actually the language of transformation as well. And one of the things that I think is super powerful around humanising transformation and the Dilyn Way is that anybody that really looks at and investigates and commits to the Dilyn Way as a practice becomes a role model, modern leader in and of themselves. So it's super, super important. And again, as always, to let everybody know to reach out, that if anybody would like to know a little bit more about who they are as a modern leader, who they are as a practitioner, or I'd just like to know a little bit more about where I'm going, Mel, how could I bring the concept of humanising transformation into my work and my professional career? This is open doors for everybody. So strategy session, a 1 hour one-to-one with myself to talk about now, future and mapping, or one of those. So just let me know and we can pop some time in the diary. But really important for everybody to know that there is that opportunity to just talk one-to-one with myself, just about who you are as a modern leader, who you are as a practitioner in the world of transformation. So bringing today's session to a little bit of a close and hopefully some questions and some thoughts, because blimey, jargon, it's just, what a subject. A couple of quotes just to remind us that it's not always negative. It's not always something that we've got to rip and replace. A few lovely quotes here just to keep reminding ourselves that sometimes there is a place for jargon, as long as it's devoid of ego and it's not for the use of power, that it doesn't break people, and it's not BS that we're trying to basically hide behind not knowing what we're talking about. So super, super, super important. So in summary of today, what have we got? Well, the fact of the matter is, jargon's everywhere. We get served it and we serve out jargon without kind of realizing it, given the definitions and the instances of jargon that we've seen earlier on. It can absolutely be used for good and bad. And without any question of a doubt, jargon can instantly lose trust, but it can also gain trust if we're in that world of transformation. We're trying to get people into a new identity. I think for me, what is really important is this sense of critical thinking, is being open to critical thinking of our own words and our own narrative and our own our own writing, as well as building our awareness of the impact that we're having on others. How aware are we of the people that we are communicating with, of the people that we are trying to engage with, way beyond just the normal personas that we tend to do before we go into design, but really deeply be aware emotionally, physically, and everything beyond that for the human. So really seeing the human holistically, and also recognize that jargon is slightly different to buzzwords. Sometimes buzzwords come in and out of business, work, and life. Buzzwords are transient. Buzzwords are things that are more to do with trend, and they might work for us, they might not. So What I've done also is I have popped in a fantastic TED talk here by Lyra Borodowski, and she talks about how language shapes the way we think. And it's a fantastic, I think it's about 2018. So it's not, you know, it's not state of the art modern, it's not just out. It's been around for a few years, but it's absolutely fantastic. And she has got several other TED Talks as well. And all of her stuff around this concept of language and words and communication are fantastic. So if you want to think about intention versus impact and really bring those things together so there isn't a gap between the two, then Lyra's work is fantastic for you to go and have a look at. So really, really cool. So banana skins, before we finish, I guess the most important thing, and hopefully you've heard the theme running through today, is jargon isn't always bad. But if it, you know, we've got to be using it, if we're using it with design, with purpose, and in the right place, and absolutely with a deep understanding of our audience, which is why it's incredibly important for us to be clear on our intention in order for us then to understand the impact that we have on others. So there we go, everybody. That is today's session coming to a close. I'm looking at the time, which means that we've got a couple of minutes just to come into the open. I'm going to stop sharing, and and by the way, Tom, thanks for that. Wow, as I said at the beginning, I was really apprehensive about today because this whole thing about jargon is so emotional. It's quite an energizer, isn't it? Both up and down when we receive it, but equally when we get called out that we are serving it. So what's come up for everybody today? Are there any thoughts or any experiences or any questions that anybody's got? What about you, Tom, in your world?
Yeah, I definitely got lots of experience of trying to regulate my own language, my own use of language, particularly around agile and introducing agile into organizations. I think it became almost a toxic word in the organization I was working with. So I just don't use it anymore. But I think I also need to be quite conscious of the words I'm replacing it with, talking about emergence and, you know, iterative. I think these are words that may be well understood, but I need to probably check on that. I did have one question, which was, if there is a particular concept or a particular idea that you want to bring into a group or bring into a tribe, what's the best way of doing that? So the particular idea, I was dealing with a team, and they had lots and lots of calls that were coming into their team that were avoidable. You know, it was error demand. And I wanted to bring in the concept of error demand without just saying it and expecting them to know it. So I'm not sure if I handled that particularly well. I just wondered if you had any advice on how to introduce a piece of jargon into a tribe that you're not initially part of.
Yeah. So the first thing that you can do in that particular instance, and I'll open it up to other people as well, is what you can do is you can go to the principles of plain language. So if you go to the website plainlanguage.gov, you can see that it takes you through step by step. So genuinely, what you're saying here is error demand is an issue, and if I can work with this team on error demand, I know that there is going to be value as a result of it. But using that phrase could actually could lose their trust because they might see it as a buzzword. So the first thing that I would do is I would just go and have a look at some of those principles, and the active versus passive voice is one of them that might work with them, especially if they're on the phone and they're in customer service. Then the active versus passive voice is one thing that you could do. So go to the principles of plainlanguage.gov and have a look at those. So that will allow you in the background to maybe just see whether there is another way of saying exactly the same thing without using error demand. That's the first thing that you can do. The second thing which you can do, which I think is really important, is just check with yourself how well you really know these people in terms of who they are, that observation, that awareness of who they are. and just check out with some of their narrative. Have they got tribal speak? Because they're a team, right? So there will be some tribal speak in there. And if there's some tribal speak in there, you picking up that tribal speak will allow you to create a Maya, which is, this is the tribal speak, this is their familiar language. I'm going to start using that in my narrative, but I'm just going to put some new stuff, some possibility around. So they might have language around the word demand. Yeah. So you might have language around that. So you might be able to use that. And in narrative, just say to them, when is demand good and when is demand bad? And then just, you can edge them to that boundary of understanding something which is called error demand. And so that's another way. And the thing that, and Dilyn's coming in. So I'll say one other thing, and then I'll go over to Dilyn. There is a brilliant, there's another TED Talk, and it's by a guy called Andrew Stanton. And it's a guy that he used to write all the stories, he probably still does, for Pixar, the Pixar animations. And that TED Talk is brilliant because he talks to you about how to tell a story leading to the punchline. Now, if you were to take the concept of error demand as your punchline, how can you create a story that builds people up to, they're waiting for it, they're waiting for it, they're waiting for it, and you reveal it as error demand. And what you've done is you've brought them on the journey of the story with you. So storytelling is another way to positively use, jargon or professional speak for something as well. So plain language, so plainlanguage.gov, which is simplification. Just thinking about your zone of Maya. So looking and observing them, so understand them. So what's their tribal kind of language, and bring that in. And the third one is the storytelling. So building it up to, they're waiting for you to give them the reveal. So it's storytelling. So have a look at that TED Talk. Dilyn, sorry, I took a little bit longer than I thought on answering that, but
yeah, no worries. I was thinking of coming at Tom's story from another perspective, from the other side. How do you manage and engage with someone who constantly uses jargon, and how do you sort of, from the other side or the other perspective, how do you manage that situation?
So that's a really good question, actually. It's a really good question. And actually, I'm just thinking about John and myself, just in our world of coaching and mentoring. That's quite an interesting question, because it feels like it is quite a kind of coaching and mentoring question. So I'd like to bring John into it as well in a moment as well. I guess really what I would do there is, I wouldn't call it out, because I don't think that's ethical. Some people might, but you don't know why, right? You don't know why that. You might assume that person is using it for ego. You might assume that person is using it and they're completely and utterly unaware, but you actually really don't know why, because their reason, their belief system that's driving the use of the jargon is unknown to you. It's invisible to you. So what I would tend to do is use open questions. So I would maybe, so Tom comes to me and he says, right, so Mel, the thing that's really needed here is demand management. And not demand management, error management. And I'd be sitting there going, what is Tom going on about? So I would probably say to Tom, Tom, can you tell me what that looks like? Because can you tell me more about that? And I'd try to understand it, and I'd try to unpick Tom's understanding of it. Does Tom know why he is saying that to me? Does he know the why of that? And if he doesn't, then it will break down for him. So I think the classic coaching, tell me more about that. What does that look like in an example? Is a really, really good way to ethically, I don't know whether ethical is the right word, Dilyn, but a really good way to just probe somebody's use of jargon without actually, saying, that's jargon, don't do that. That's just like, Tom, don't even think about it. because sometimes that's, you know, that's not the best thing to do. But that's certainly one thing for me that has and does work. John, what about you? Is there something that you might add to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said, and you certainly don't know why somebody is using jargon, but as a recipient, I think you know, for your own benefit, you've got to question it, because it's simple. There is something quite, you know, the misunderstood word, and it becomes a complete barrier to learning. All it takes is just one misunderstood word, and a couple of sentences further down the line, you start yawning. And what that is it just shows there's something you don't understand. So you know, and that one misunderstood word can then, you know, it just then leads to something else, and you end up sort of just not missing the whole context of whatever is being described and talked about, and you miss out on learning. So you do have to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand, you know, or just repeat the, you know, the phrase with a question mark to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't just let it lie, otherwise it will affect your learning ability.
Absolutely, especially if I absolutely agree, and I think some really, really good feedback there, especially if they're using it a lot, Dilyn, because, you know, that is, you know, that can just, you know, disassociate them with so many people, and you know, to the point of isolating them, and again, you know, because you don't know why they could already be lonely, and they're using, you know, I'm not saying that they would be, because it might be, you know, a lot of, you know, it might be because of ego and power. There is something that that John alluded to there at the end with his example, was there is a technique called mirroring that you can that is taught a lot. And that's something that we use a lot in mentoring and coaching. So if somebody gives you jargon, and you've kind of got, you're fuzzy, do you know what I mean? You're fuzzy about it. So it's not completely and utterly, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about, but there's a little bit of fuzziness in there. Then what you can say to the person is, Tom, can I just play that back to you in my words? Can I just play that back? Just so that I understand. And what that does is it allows you to challenge, but without being vulnerable yourself. And you know, that is something that you can do as well. So and that technique is just basically, it's just, can I mirror it back to you? Can I mirror what you've just said to me back in terms of how I've understood it? So
I do find it's a two-way street, though. I think that you need to be able to ask questions and have the courage to, you know, sometimes plead ignorance if you don't understand a certain type of jargon. But I also think you need to be talking to a type of management that is open to questions and open to elaborate further. So I do kind of think it takes two parties to surpass any type of jargon.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, and also you do, you know, in support of what John said, you can't let it lie, because if you let it lie, two things are going to happen. The individual is probably going to do it against somebody else without knowing, and you're going away with a lack of learning and confusion, and possibly just a little bit of you know, lower energy of oh my God, you know, I'm useless. I don't understand what error demand is. I'm just, you know, I shouldn't be in this job. You know, it's a little bit of that. So I think there is definitely something about it has to be called, you know, which is why earlier on in the slides where I said it is really healthy for us to talk about the pros and cons of jargon in the context of business and work, because it is everywhere. And you know, if we can just get the conversation going, then it is more likely for people to actually, you know, even be able to say in a safe space without being detrimental to their well-being, was that jargon that you just said there, Tom? You know, and Tom being able to go, blimey, I never even thought about it, Mel, I think so. I'm picking on you, Tom. You know, just so I think it you know, there's huge amounts of value for us to get the word jargon in socialized a little bit more in business and work, because there is validity to it. Because the majority of people, we've got one customer, and one customer has said that you know, talking about agile, it's absolute jargon. We're not having any of it. It will never work. It will never work in our organization. But they want to move to agile ways of working, but everything will not work for them. So what will work for them? And what they want is they want you know, they want to be able to collaborate more. Okay, so we're talking with the organization, we're talking with the teams, and the teams are saying, we don't need that. We don't need. We're already doing it. So so when we're talking to the SLT, we're saying, we've done that. Guess what? They don't want it. So I think you've got to be careful for what you replace it with. That you know, you don't dilute it. It's really important as well. You mentioned that, Tom, in terms of your example.
Yeah, agile is I think so many people have had a bad experience now of you know, a failed agile project, or a project that was agile in name but not in nature, and so it's become a bit of a poisoned word. So if I can talk about all of the things I mean when I say agile without actually using the word, then I will do. And then eventually, once all the patterns and habits and behaviors are established, then we can actually break out the label and say, you know, what we're doing here is an agile development. There's no need to introduce it with that label, because the objective is not to do agile, it's to be agile.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked a little bit of the story. There's a natural kind of little bit of storytelling to the reveal that you've kind of, you know, that you've described there. Really important. I know that we're over time, but really important, just as a final thought, I guess, for everybody, is the idea of labels. You know, it's so easy for us to label things in work, isn't it? And all of a sudden it's got this label, and it's like, what does that mean? You know, what does that label mean? It's really important for us to think about labels as well.
Just as a sort of a positive on jargon, I think when we first introduced ourselves to our current main customer, that opening meeting, we used 3 or 4 sort of key phrases that they wrote down and have used ever since. And it was that, you know, use of jargon almost that they'd never heard before, but immediately related to, and immediately thought, right, these are fresh thinkers. These are people that understand the world in a slightly different way to us. Maybe it was on the edge of their comfort area, but it was definitely new language and new sort of phrases. And I think that there was some value in that for us that I'd probably not appreciated before. So.
And there's you know, there's also something that comes out of that as well, which is a little bit to Dilyn's point, is sometimes people use the jargon word just because they don't want to change. That's jargon. It's different. We don't want any of that there. We don't need any of that. It's jargon, you know. So they kind of use the jargon card to avoid. You know, exactly. So it's really, really interesting. And remember as well that, you know, if we are introducing new language and it is in the right, you know, it is, you know, all things are considered, and we're doing it in the right way for the value, and it is the right thing to do, we need to be communicating 7 to 9 times. 7 to 9 times before somebody hears something the first time. 7 to 9 times. So, you know, there's no point as sending something out that has got new language in it, and thinking that people are going to, you know, either understand it, remember it, or even adopt it. You know, when it comes to new language, it's incredibly important for us to be able to not just define it, but to repeatedly give visibility of it 7 to 9 times for people to hear it the first time, and then the journey begins. Super, super important.
But interestingly, Mel, if you keep saying the same thing in exactly the same way, because you might be using some jargon that the audience doesn't understand, you should be able to adapt your jargon so that they do understand what it is you're saying. Maybe it's you that's using the jargon that nobody else knows. So
yes, absolutely. So what I'm saying, yeah. So you know, as an experiment, if we've done all of that stuff and we know that the use of this jargon is of value and is the right thing to do, that's where that 7 to 9 communication comes from. But if you're just doing it blindly and you haven't done the observation and you haven't gone through, you know, the principles, then you're absolutely right. Yeah. And the other thing as well is saying it in the same place at the same time in the same way is also going to, you know, I mean, that's not even jargon, that's just generally, it's just people are going to, you know, zone out, aren't they? Exactly. There we go. That is the end of another kind of crazy Wednesday humanizing transformation moment. We have done it. We have talked about a little bit of an elephant in the room, haven't we, in terms of jargon today? The conversation could be expanded. We could talk about so many other things, but I guess just in summary is it is everywhere. We are all both users and receivers of jargon. And the most important thing is for us to understand when it is used for good and not when it is used for other purposes. So there we go, jargon. I would love to know more if you've got any thoughts, and if anybody would like to grab hold of the slides with any of the links, then just let me know and I will send them through, and we'll be hooftying off the recording to everybody hopefully later on today. So it is Wednesday, as I said at the start, it is top of the week. I hope that everybody has a really, really strong Thursday and Friday so that we can end the week really strongly and on a high, and have a great weekend ahead. So hopefully I will see everybody next week. Take care, and well, how much jargon are you going to receive or give for the rest of today? Who knows, huh? Take care, everybody, and stay safe.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Cheers all. Thanks, Mel.
Cheers, everyone.